Okay, welcome to Chapter 7. Chapter 7 is all about doing input and output. And you guys know the drill. I'm going to go over the learning objectives. So on page 287, talks about differentiate among various types of keyboards, describe characteristics of various pointing devices, describe uses of touch screens, describe various types of pen input, describe various uses of motion input, voice, video, differentiate among various scanners and reading devices, explain characteristics of various displays, summarize various types of printers, identify the purpose and features of speakers and headphones and earbuds, identify various assistive technologies. Okay, so that's our tasks for this particular chapter. So you start off with, well, what the heck is input? Well, input is anything that's kind of coming into the computer. You know, a keyboard is a typical example of input, but there's an awful lot of them. So, sure, mouse, touchscreen, you know, keyboards, optical readers, game controllers, all these kinds of things. So, it's any data and instruction that's entered into the computer. That's kind of a dumb example, but anyway. So again, let's start on page 290 where they talk about keyboards. And so, you guys know what a keyboard is. Come on. So, yeah, it's the keys, but there's kind of sections in there. And so most keyboards are kind of broken up into chunks or sections. You have the typing area, with letters and numbers and stuff, the normal kind of stuff. Have function keys across the top. And these are called function keys because you don't necessarily know what they do. I mean, if I press the A key, I pretty much will know it's going to be an A. It's going to appear on the screen. But if I hit function 4, I don't know. It kind of sort of depends. If I'm inside one particular application, that might mean something. If I'm in another application, it might do something completely different. So they're application keys or function keys. And that's an odd thing too. It's kind of difficult to explain that to someone. If I said, press the F1 key, they might think F followed by 1. Because it's kind of hard to say that to mean the F1 key, the function key. Toggle keys. Toggle keys mean I'm turning a feature on and off, like caps lock. You hit the key and it turns the caps lock on. You hit this very same key a second time, it turns it off. Num lock, caps lock, things of that nature. Then you have the directional keys, the up arrow, down arrow, maybe page up, page down, those kind of cool things. Media control buttons. An awful lot of the newer machines have an extra row of buttons that allow you to, stop the video play or adjust the volume or screen brightness, things of that nature. And they're just convenience. Obviously, they have nothing to do with typing. But they're just a convenient place to put controls for your computer. And some of them even have internet control kind of buttons. A button that'll launch your email, or a button that'll launch your browser, or a button that launches, Microsoft has a Windows key that you can hit that, brings up the Windows kind of start mechanism, depending on what operating system you have. It's somewhat slightly different. But anyway, just things that are specific to the operating system. Mac OS has something similar to that. They have a little key that launches their kind of menu thing. Okay. On page 291, they talk about the different types of keyboards you're typically going to find. You're going to find them in a traditional, keyboard, like a USB keyboard or wireless keyboard. Then you're going to have, like on a laptop, where it's, it's physically attached. It's built in somehow, where it doesn't come off, obviously. Then you have like the tablets where you may have a detachable keyboard where you plug the computer into a keyboard. The keyboard's portable and you can carry the keyboard with you if you want. If you don't want to, you can leave it at home. And then of course, if you don't have a keyboard, under those scenarios where you leave the keyboard at home, you have an on-screen keyboard. An on-screen keyboard is okay. I wouldn't want to write a novel with it. There's no... You have to... When I'm typing on my keyboard, I don't have to look at my fingers. I can just type. But with an on-screen keyboard, I got to be looking straight at where I'm hitting because I can't tell if my finger's off by a little bit. So it's not very efficient, and it's considerably slower for most people, and it certainly is slower for me. So I tend to not use the on-screen keyboard unless I absolutely have to. And if it's just typing out, my name or something, I'm filling in a form or something, that's okay. But again, I'm not going to write a novel with an on-screen keyboard. No way. On page 292, they talk about the ergonomic keyboard. And if you think about it, the human body is usually about this wide, right? And so it doesn't make sense for a keyboard to have your hands be like this. It makes more sense to have the keyboard where your hands are kind of pointed out like this. It's a little bit more comfortable. It's a little more natural. And so some people claim that these ergonomic keyboards are better for your health and have less issues with carpal tunnel syndrome and those kinds of things. Personally, it's like what you grew up with and what you learned. If you learned on an ergonomic keyboard, you probably love it. If you learned on a traditional keyboard, you might say, you can't switch back and forth. I mean, it would drive me nuts if I had one ergonomic, one not, and I, constantly switch back between the two. I don't know if I could handle that. It would drive me nuts. So again, whatever you're kind of used to, that's great. Okay. Next, they talk about, on page 292, they talk about pointing devices. And of course, you have the cursor. And so I'm moving the mouse around, and I have a little arrow cursor. By the way, cursor, is not, the origin of the word is not that you're cursing at that little thing. That's not it. It's a Latin word. It means runner. And it's been used in the print industry and scientific industry for quite some time. It was used on slide rules and all sorts of other things. Pointing, devices that read, with a meter. Anyway, so cursor's been around for quite some time. Although I do tend to curse at it. So the better definition is a pointer. A small symbol on the screen whose location and shape changes as a user moves the pointing device. So I move this guy around and he changes location, and depending on where he is, he actually could change shape. If I'm inside a document like this, I get a little I-beam, and as soon as I move it out, it changes shape to a double head and goes back to, Okay, so a mouse. A mouse is the most iconic pointing device on computers these days, and again, you can have a corded mouse, one that you can actually plug into a USB port. Those are actually getting kind of tough. If you were to go to an electronics or office supply place and say, show me your selection of mice, you might be hard-pressed to actually find one that was not cordless. Okay, so mice, in addition to be able to point, you have to be able to do something. And so there's buttons on the thing. And so most mice, particularly in the PC world, not so much in the Apple world, started out with having two buttons. And so the normal way you click on something is just it's on the left side of the mouse. So where your index finger would be if you were holding it. And so that was the action button. And then you had the right clicking, which meant the button typically on your ring finger, depending on how you hold your mouse. Typically, me, that's my left button, and my ring finger is the right button. And so right button meant, special functions, and usually prompt me for something, a menu or something like that. So for example, I'm inside the photo viewer. If I right click, I get a cool little menu and ask me what I want to do. If I right click, traditional left click, nothing happens. So when people say click on something without saying left click, they mean left click. And if they want you to click the right button, they say right click. So in the absence of right click, every time you're told to click, it means a traditional left click. Okay, cool. Let's continue. So in addition to the normal mouse, there's other things. A lot of laptops, for example, don't want you to have to carry a bunch of stuff with you. Don't want you to have to carry a mouse. And so they have alternate pointing devices. And the most obvious one is one called a little trackpad. So they have a little spot, a little square, usually right underneath the keys, where you can kind of use your finger and you just press on this little square and the cursor moves on the screen. Kind of cool. Some have physical buttons that you push, and others you actually double tap the touchpad itself to simulate a physical button. It's kind of weird. Then you have the kind that's a little pointing stick. IBM in the day and Lenovo afterwards kind of champion this little thing. It looks almost like a rubber eraser sticking up in the middle of your keyboard. And it was a very, very tiny little joystick. And so this little thing stuck up in the middle, and you could nudge it this way and nudge it that way, and you'd nudge this little guy, and the cursor would go around. And that was pretty cool because it didn't take up hardly any room, and you didn't have to leave your hands didn't have to leave the keyboard. They could stay kind of in a natural position. Whereas the touchpad, I would have to move my hand down and then move it back. Anyway. And then, of course, you have trackballs, and I don't see those hardly anymore. I've seen some gaming systems that instead of having a mouse that you physically move around, the mouse essentially stays put. And then instead you have this little ball associated with it, and you just roll the ball around to move things around. Again, I don't see those much nowadays. The most obvious alternative to any type of pointing device is to have a touch-sensitive screen. So my wife has a machine that has a touch-sensitive monitor, and I have a monitor that looks practically identical to that, except mine is not touch. And let me tell you, I switch back and forth between the two, and I'll go crazy because I'll reach out and touch on the screen, and nothing happens. And I go, oh yeah, I'm not on a touch screen anymore. Anyway, the idea is that small devices, it works fantastic. So I'm holding my cell phone in my hand, and I have my finger. And so it's very obvious that touch in that scenario is fantastic because I'm holding it in my hand and I'm using my finger to do something. In a desktop environment, touch is kind of strange because the monitor is too far away. It's almost like it's at arm's length, right? So I've got my arm stuck out and I'm touching this thing. And if you have to do that a lot, that takes an awful lot of muscle. It sounds crazy, but it takes an awful lot of muscle to hold your arm out like that and touch things. And so it's not very comfortable, it's not very natural. But things that you hold close to you, particularly things you hold in one hand, like a tablet or a mouse, then you're good to go. So in addition to just having touch screen, some computers have a pen or a stylus to allow you to do stuff. So even with touch, if you tried to sign your name, okay, so you pull out your iPad, and with your finger, you want to sign your name, okay, with your finger. It's going to look like total crap because your finger is just too big and it's just not natural. But if I gave you a stylus and told you to write your name using the stylus, you could, and it would look just like a normal signature that you did with an honest-to-God, pencil or ink and pen. So styluses provide you slightly more control. So if I'm an artist, for example, I'm probably not going to paint with my fingertip. It doesn't provide me fine enough control. But pen provides me very much more control. And there's pressure-sensitive pen. So you know how, if this was an artist, right, and I had a paintbrush, if I pushed down hard, I'd get a really fat line, wouldn't I? And then I could kind of taper it off. I could lift the pen off the page as I'm painting, and the line would taper, right? Well, the pressure-sensitive pens do the same thing. So if you're an artist or you're trying to have very realistic, handwriting, then the pen is clearly the way to go and not with your finger. Okay, so let's say I've got a machine here and I don't have a touch-sensitive screen, and I don't want to pay for one because those suckers are expensive, but I still want to be able to do some really cool graphic arts stuff. Well, you can buy a digitizing tablet. Now, this is not a computer, so I'm using the term tablet in a slightly different context. It's just a device, typically hooked up to the USB port, that has instead of having a little pressure-sensitive thing like on a laptop, this is like, big thing. It could be, 8 by 10 thing that sits on your desk with a pen, and it's a pressure-sensitive pad that allows you to do stuff on a machine that doesn't already support touch. It works pretty good if you're a draftsman or an artist, and so that's kind of what it's for. Okay, this is probably a good place to stop for the 15-minute mark. We'll pick this thing up again in just a few.